Hello there. This is an episode of Now This Was Lit, which means it's an episode of Now This Is Lit that you may have already heard before. But if not, you get to hear it, maybe, for the first time. This miniseries will run through most of the summer, and it features interviews I've done in the past with Star Wars authors and creators. They're some of my favorites and some of the favorites of our Patreon community. So I really hope that you enjoy this interview from the past. It's like time travel, except not really, but we can pretend it is. Enjoy. This episode of Now This Is Lit is brought to you by Audible. Check the link in the description to get your first Star Wars audiobook free. Everyone loves free things. Click that link. Do it. This show is also brought to you by our patrons. If you want to support the show in a different way, with just $1 a month, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/StarWarsLitPod. You can get a sticker. You can get access to an exclusive show that we do every month that's wild and chaotic and fun and something you can only get by becoming a member of the Patreon. There'll be so many more perks very, very soon. But for now, do you want a sticker? Do you want a sticker that has an Now This Is Lit logo? Because it's fantastic and I love them. But I also want to give them away because there's just a stack of stickers on my desk. So if you want one, $1 a month. Patreon.com/StarWarsLitPod. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. You're listening to Now This Is Lit, a podcast about Star Wars books, the people who make them, and the readers who just can't get enough of them. I'm your host, Meg Dowell. I use she, her pronouns. And I've wanted to talk to Jason Fry for a very long time, probably since before I started the show. I'm a fan of so many of the Star Wars related things that he has written. Reference books, a novelization, a really good book series that you may not have even heard of that we will talk about. Because yes, we talked about a lot of things, and I kept him on this recording for so much longer than I promised, but I promise it's worth a listen, and we had a great time, and I'm so glad we got to do it. I hope you enjoy this interview as much as I did. Fun, easy, simple, straightforward question for you to start. Tell me about your Star Wars history, your relationship with the franchise, your earliest memory, if you will.
It's been funny how this question has changed over time because I'm old enough to date back to the world before Star Wars, which is like increasingly rare. So it's for the ever larger percentage of people for whom that's not true. I think it's a little startling to contemplate. Like Star Wars was just this movie that showed up. But the amazing thing about it was, I mean, I was only 8 years old when it came out, but that's still old enough to like be kind of enmeshed in pop culture, etc.
Yeah.
And I'd never seen anything like that. Like everyone, literally everyone, every neighbor on your street, every one of your friends' parents, etc., like had either seen Star Wars or were going to see it again. And nothing like that had ever happened. It was so strange. It was a little like kind of kid movie Woodstock. Like what has happened to everybody? And then of course it changed everything. It took me, I mean, I loved the movie. I say, and it's true, that as a kid who already wanted to be a writer and tell stories, like by the time you saw the back engines of Darth Vader's Star Destroyer, like I knew on some level that like life was different and like had to figure out exactly how, but I already knew. But that said, I wasn't an immediately gigantic dorky fan like I am now right out of the gate. Like that took a while. And it was action figures that did it. Like I got it into my head like I needed some of the Kenner action figures, and then went through this incredible thing about like which two to buy, because that's all I could afford at the beginning was two, which is a tough question. If you're buying two, who do you buy? Um, so I started off as a huge, huge fan, and then just never gave that up. It continued to speak to me. Um, and the thing that was most interesting for me, to leave you briefly, feel like I and everyone who knew me as a kid assumed that I would grow up to be a sports writer, because I was an enormous baseball fan, which I still am, and loved the game and knew it inside out. And that was just very logical as a kid who wanted to write, go be a sports writer, which I could have done if I wanted to. I chose not to become one because an ironclad rule of sports writing is that there's no cheering in the press box. And if you know athletes, if you're in the locker room with them, it's a very quick way to stop being a fan. I mean, not that they aren't, some of them, very interesting people, but they're fundamentally different from you and me, and you're going to see the money and everything else. So I made a deliberate decision not to become a sports writer because I did not want to stop being a baseball fan. Um, and I had that lesson in mind when I finally got the chance to write Star Wars. And I was very ambivalent about it. Like, did I really want to do this? Because I knew, between the sports writing thing and also being a professional journalist, I knew that if I did that, I would know how the sausage was made. I'd be inside and I'd see things. And that's often an excellent recipe for no longer being a fan of something. So that was a really kind of tricky thing. It was kind of, standing on the edge of something and knowing, like, that was kind of a one-way trip. You were going to decide what you decided, and then that was going to be it. So it's immensely gratifying to me, and I think says a lot about Star Wars, that the experience has been wonderful. Like, after writing for Star Wars for many, many years, I'm, if anything, more of a fan. I have not quite never, but it's vanishingly rare that I've met any other writer or creative who also isn't a big dorky Star Wars fan and loves the galaxy far, far away and wants what is best for it. And that's certainly true of everyone I've ever dealt with at Lucasfilm. And I think that's pretty extraordinary. That's been enormously heartening. It's made me unbelievably happy, both as a writer, but also as a Star Wars fan. And I suspect that is really not true for a lot of other IPs. Not because there's anything wrong with them, but because Star Wars is special. So, I can look back and, I think if I could tell 8-year-old me who had just seen Star Wars and, thought it was cool and things were percolating in his little head, like what I was doing now, I think 8-year-old me would be delighted by it. And rightly so. And that's a really, really nice place to be on this now, fairly 4 decades plus journey.
The one thing I wondered about when I started my journey of like wanting to just see how many Star Wars authors I could convince to talk to me about their
Yeah,
books, I was like, oh, but what if, like, I didn't actually believe this, but somewhere in the back of my mind, I was like, oh, but what if like they're not nice? Or like what if they don't
yeah,
actually like Star Wars or they're just doing it to do it? And that is not true, thankfully. Every author that I've talked to is not only a huge Star Wars fan, but genuinely, because you can hear it in their voice, you can see it in their face, and in the things that they're saying, they genuinely love what they do. And so many of you can't believe still that you actually get to write Star Wars, and it's so funny to me. And I'm like, but like you, for example, have been writing Star Wars for a long time.
yeah.
And I'm like, but you've done so many cool things, but like the reaction is always like, oh, like I don't know if they're gonna let me do it again. And I'm like, but I'm sure they would.
Right. Yeah. No, it's a really nice community. And there's, uh, because it's Star Wars, I mean, who knows? I mean, is this self-selecting? Is this the really good job that the folks in Lucasfilm Publishing do? Is it some of both? I don't know. But it's a really, really nice community. Like, pretty much everyone understands, like, this is the world's greatest sandbox, and these aren't your toys. You don't get to take them with you. You don't get to tell other people they can't play with them. Like you just, you sit there and you have fun and you share. And it's been really nice to see that. And it's this kind of weirdo caravan that grows ever larger with authors. But I'm always delighted to see the ones I know and meet the new ones. And yeah, it's just fun. Another thing I'm pretty sure is not true for a lot of other intellectual properties.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we're really lucky. And like I don't have like a ton of fandoms. But like I am a fan of other things and like a lot of other fan communities. I'm like I don't know. And like the people involved. It's Star Wars is different somehow. Um Especially when you get into, talking with and interacting with so many of the people who get to make it. And like it's hard to, I don't think it would be possible to really just not be in this and not be genuine about how much you love it. I mean, because like even, there's talking to authors is one thing, but reading the stories also, I'm like, I can tell now in like a certain chapter, I'm like, oh, this person had so much fun writing this. Like
Yeah.
it just comes through. And that has to be a combination of, the writers, the editing, and like there's something about like the fans add something to it too. The readers who are like, oh, like I noticed this tiny little Easter egg that you threw in there that you thought no one would notice, but I did. And it's just
Yeah.
so fun. It's so
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah. No, it's a very special community in all the ways you define. And yeah, but as we've been discussing, I think everybody feels incredibly lucky to be a part of it.
Um, I wanted to be like, ugh, I wanted to word this next question as carefully as I could, and I will explain what I mean. Because I'm going to ask you about your experience in the let's say changeover from Legends to canon. Now, normally I don't like to compare the two. I don't like to have that hard divide when we are talking about Star Wars stories in general because it comes sometimes in the fandom with a negative connotation, and that's not where we're going with this. Because for me personally, Star Wars stories are Star Wars stories, and I just love that they exist. And I don't like, you know, putting things against each other. But what I am interested in, is, from a more behind the scenes perspective, because you worked on reference materials before, um, things kind of changed over. I'm not using the best wording, but we're using what we got.
I know what you mean.
Um, Yeah. And then you've also worked on things after that. So I'm curious about whether or not when that happened, your kind of approach to certain things shifted or like kind of because I've talked to John Jackson Miller, and he didn't really speak to this specifically, but he did have the experience of um, writing a very uh popular Legends book and then which wasn't Legends at the time, but then coming in with canon things and has done wonderful things since then. So I'm curious how kind of like what that was like for you, if it was different in any specific way or if it kind of just was sort of the same thing, but some things were maybe not quite the same.
Yeah, I think it was probably much harder for JJM. I
Yeah.
believe A New Dawn, I mean, I believe the process of that book being written was right on either side
Yeah.
of that, which I mean, that's a lot. I'm glad it was him and not me. Plus, then I just get to read that book, which I love, and
It's
and not have it to go back to, having had to create it. Um, so yeah, this is an interesting one for me. I was just sitting down to write the first Servants of the Empire book, Edge of the Galaxy, when this happened. And I remember going to Leland Chee and some of the other story group people, and I was like, okay, I've got this scene early in the book where Zare and like some friends, they're basically train spotting, but let's use, Star Wars stuff. They're like looking up and there's a TIE fighter and because they're like kind of military dorks, they know what the engine is. And I was like, I know, what the ion engine or whatever it is in Legends is. How do I describe it now that we're in new canon? Like, is it the same? Do I have to review that, etc.? And I was like kind of stumbling my way through the question, and
Yeah.
I think it was Leland was like, "Why would we change that?" I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "It's yeah, it's an engine. Like, why would we like no, we're not going to do that." And it led to what I've come to think of as the infrastructure EU. Like all that is pretty much the same. It's just kind of the history, specifically the history right around the main characters, um, and the time frame that we've seen, a couple of trilogies worth of characters operate in. Like that stuff was up for grabs. But the rest, that kind of all that kind of infrastructure level was not. I mean, for the most part, if something was that way, in Legends, it's that way in New Canon. And I found that immensely reassuring, both as an author trying to make my way here, but also as a fan. It gave me, and I acknowledge that different fans are going to have different opinions on this, but it gave me a grounding I found very reassuring. Like I was thoroughly up for new stories, even if they went over ground that I knew from the EU that was not going to be different. Totally fine with that because and we can talk about this if you want. I mean, that's the way I grew up with Star Wars, reading stuff like Splinter the Mind's Eye
Yeah.
and comics that didn't mesh, and it never bothered me.
Yeah.
So I was up for that, but at the same time, it was really reassuring to me to know that a lot of the kind of furniture was the same. And I'm a gigantic cartography dork. Like that's kind of my specialty. So one thing that was hugely reassuring to me was that the map was the same. And I mean, the Lucasfilm was explicit about that right early on. It's the same map, they said, and publicly, which was great. Not just because I'd, spent an ungodly number of hours invested in that old map, but also just kind of as a fan. I will say this though, I think this is something that some fans out there may not expect, but I think also adds to that message. Like, particularly when it came to the geography, I was an early. I kind of made a pest of myself around the transition to new canon, like asking questions. I was like, look on the map, we've got kind of two-thirds of a galaxy that's settled, and then this gigantic unknown regions that doesn't particularly make sense. Like, why is that? We've got an outer rim that's the galactic frontier, but it's like really settled for thousands of years. I'm like, should we, this is an ideal opportunity to rethink all of that and say, if we don't want it this way, what should it look like? Should we do that? And I was kind of pushing kind of hard for that. And the folks at Story Group were like, no, it's the same map. Don't mess with that. Leave it alone. Which, I think I came around to the idea that they were right and that I was actually really glad that they weren't listening to, you know, mavericks like me and considering that. So they're, you know, um, in ways that matter, I think a lot to me and a lot to other fans. They're, fiercely protective of that and bring a lot of sense of responsibility to it.
And that's so good to hear, because I know a lot of fans were a little bit hesitant, when all this was happening, kind of being like, oh, are they kind of just erasing everything that came before? And the answer is not really. There's so many things that they have kept, and like just to be able to see how, over the last 10 plus years now, how canon stories have, evolved in their own way, but have also, because you have so many authors working on these stories that read Legends books
Yeah,
and are fans of them. And so they can honor them in their stories in like little teeny tiny ways. It could be like, oh, they name something after a character. That happens sometimes. Or they're like, oh, this will remind you of this thing, or some kind of
yeah.
Easter egg. And it's fun. And I think it's been really interesting to see that kind of play out over time because I read some of the books when I was younger, but not enough of them where I was in any way like flustered that they were kind of like doing this Legends canon change. I
Yeah.
was more curious than anything else. I was like, oh, but the thing for me that it did was it gave me the chance to kind of almost start from the beginning with the book. So I'm like, oh, I'm not
Yeah.
hundreds of books behind now. Of course, now I'm going back and reading all the Legends books I didn't read before, because it's fun and I can. But it was a little less overwhelming for me when I did get back into the books to be like, oh, like there's only this many canon books that I can read and feel like I'm caught up. So for me, it was fine. And I know that it's not the case for everyone, but it's really interesting how, different perspectives kind of change the way you might look at that.
Yeah, and and fundamentally, I say this all the time, but it has the added benefit of being true, is, my favorite Legend Star Wars book is Han Solo at Star's End by Brian Daley. I mean, I read that book when I was, oh God, when did it come out? It came out when I was like 11. I mean, I read that book as a kid, immediately loved it. It's one of those books that holds up when you read it as an adult.
Yeah.
Um, but what's my favorite Star Wars book? It's Han Solo at Star's End by Brian Daley. Like, it doesn't matter that it has a Legends. I
Yeah.
don't care.
Yeah.
Why should anybody else? I mean, it's a
Yeah.
phenomenal book. It's
Yeah.
the best portrayal of Han outside of the movies,
Mhm.
and even better than the portrayal in some of the movies. So, I will love that book, whatever you label it,
Mhm.
etc., for as long as I'm reading. And I know a lot of people feel the same way, and
Yeah.
that's I think that's a perspective that puts this in the proper light, or at least I hope so.
Oh yeah, definitely. There's a solid book recommendation for all of you listening, who may not have read that book. It's very good. I read it probably about 5 years ago for the first time, and I'm due for a reread. It's just so good. You mentioned Servants of the Empire, and I will tell you, I love these books. And no one, okay, in whatever reach my algorithm has. I don't see anyone talking about them ever, and it's a tragedy. Um, I think they're great. I've loved them since I first read them, and I've wanted to talk to you about them for so long. I just love them so much.
Oh,
Um, and we hit a 10-year anniversary on at least a couple of them recently, I think.
oh my God, really?
Yeah, I don't have my exact timeline in front of me, but I think last year might have been the 10-year of the first one at least. Oh, I don't
Oh, that's
remember.
terrifying.
Yeah. But also great. Because look at me. Maybe it's only me, I don't know, still talking about them 10 years. Um, Tell me about your experience working on these, because they are um a project that you worked on that is kind of unique compared to all of the other things that you've done. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, I love these books. I feel so grateful I got to work on them. It's it's very interesting experience looking back on them, for a number of ways. Um, Sadly, they, I think, got hurt by a um, Star Wars fan phenomenon that I've just learned just exists. Like, Star Wars fans, a new show comes out, and the reaction is to not like it because it's not like the previous show. I think we're getting over this a little in the live TV era, maybe,
I think so.
but that happened over and over again. Like, at the beginning, nobody liked Rebels because it wasn't Clone Wars.
Mm.
And then people got over that. And then nobody liked Resistance in the beginning because it wasn't Rebels.
Mm.
And it's like, oh my God, enough. Can we just skip to the part where we really like this show and can talk about it? But, the Servants of the Empire books got stuck in that, unfortunately, a little bit. It was also a very busy time for Star Wars. But they were, oh my God, they were so much fun to work on. And I had a lot of help from, Jen Heddle and Mike Siglane at Lucasfilm were great to me in helping shape them. And but it was interesting. It started off with a kind of a wild idea. Like I was like, there's never been a Star Wars sports novel. And I was thinking like, Friday Night Lights, etc. But sports is such an interesting metaphor for, it's lazily used as a metaphor for war and everything else, but a whole lot of stuff um, that if you want to see society, you can see it through sport. And I thought this had never been done in Star Wars, and I thought that wasn't a kind of compelling idea I couldn't get out of my head. And I wanted to do it. And Lucasfilm, God bless them, we're like, sure, try it. That sounds kind of interesting. Um, and that really, I just kind of dove in. But that in that first book particularly succeeded like kind of beyond my wildest dreams, like exploring sports and like kind of locker room culture and domineering coaches, et cetera. It turned out to be an absolutely perfect way, I thought, to look at the empire and kind of creeping fascism and like what you do when you figure out you're part of a system you don't agree with. Um, and but also with that first book, it was kind of amazing looking at the reaction. Like I'm part of the somewhat odd Venn diagram of like gigantic sports fans. Though for me, it's just baseball and like big Star Wars dorks. But it was really interesting looking at all the people who were not in that little small sub. I'm making hand gestures people won't be able to see, but in that little small intersection, like there was a surprising number of Star Wars fans who were just they were out. They were like, "It's a sports book. I don't care." Like I've spent my whole life like not doing that. And I was like, oh, that's really unfortunate. But okay, I respect that experience. And I also had like, my baseball fans who were like, oh my God, Star Wars, like, what does that possibly have to do with, what we do? Like, it makes no sense. And I kept, as one of the people in the Venn diagram, I kept being like, there's so much you have in common that you don't even realize. And it just is endlessly frustrating to me like the Star Wars people. I'm like, sports is just unscripted epic entertainment. Like it's the exact same thing. Like you know, endless stories of like revenge and frustration and victory and and living and dying on this universe you can't possibly affect, et cetera. It just happens to be unscripted and kind of actually happening out there. Great. And also my sports fans would be like, oh my God, this is another thing with like the people who dress up as Wookiees. And I'd be like, you're dressed as half a Major League Baseball player. Like, and you don't really look like one, my friend. So, like, come on. Like, there's so much more in common here than differences. And just, I was, it's still a little frustrating to me that I thought that would be the great kumbaya moment, and it totally was not. But it was still it was a fun book. And then as we continued that series, an interesting challenge there was that, I mean, each book was very different from the others. There was this Star Wars sports novel that's exploring fascism, and then the second book was really an overlap with a Rebels episode, which was really interesting to kind of navigate in terms of like, what are we showing? What are we not showing? How do we make this episode feel deeper while never undermining it? That's something as a reader and a fan, I just detest when a tie-in thing kind of inverts things. So it's kind of like, aha, you didn't know the real story. I'm like, no, 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 no. I want deeper, richer. I don't want to be made to feel like I was a sap when I was only seeing part of this. I never liked that. The third book of Servants of the Empire, ironically, a book that, oh my God, nearly killed me in writing it. It was so frustrating, but I think is maybe the best Star Wars book I ever wrote,
Wow.
because it's about kind of creeping fascism and, you know, when you realize like the tide is moving you places you didn't want to go, and what do you do? And then the fourth one was just kind of bonkers, like tying it all together and,
Mhm.
and trying some stuff with Star Wars and going from there. And by then also I was just, I was in love with these characters, whether they'd been handed to me by the great Rebels writing team or whether I'd made them up, and just seeing where they could go and go from there. So it was kind of all consuming, but also just great, great fun. And I've never stopped thinking about those books. I have a standing offer with Lucasfilm that, if they'll put them in a bind up, because they're about 120,000 words all put together, which is like an adult novel. Like if they'll put them in a bind up, I'll write like a next, this is what happens next short story for them for free. They don't even need to pay me, just to kind of carry that story forward. And I've never stopped thinking about where that would go. Like I deliberately left things open and seeds, not so much for me, because going back to the sandbox, that's not how Star Wars works, but for anybody who might pick that up to see, what happens to Dara, who's force sensitive and has gone through this really wrenching experience. Where does her story go? Where does Zare and Mary go, having been awakened to what they can do against the Empire? How do they do that? And just moving all those characters forward and seeing where we could get. So yeah, no, so much fun to do. I can't believe it's been 10 years, but that's what life does to you, isn't it? That was a whole big block of text. Sorry, I do that.
No, no, I love it because again, because it's been so long that we like just collectively as readers don't talk about these books as much. And one of the things that makes them so great is that they kind of ended up being like the perfect project for you to work on because it started as like, oh, can I do sports in Star Wars, which is like just you who you are, and being able to kind of do that and then like falling in love with the characters along the way and getting to kind of keep going with that story. Listen, it's been 10 years. We need that like bound edition. Give it some new art. Please. Um,
The, take the cross hatching off the pages. Oh my God, I've heard so many complaints about that. And I'm like, yeah, that is really hard to read. We could have another shot at that, maybe.
I forgot about that.
Oh, Lordy.
Um, and we we can't talk about these for the rest of the episode. But I will say that like, I think an underrated thing also about this series is, first of all, don't worry about who it's marketed to. Star Wars can be for everyone in a lot of cases, especially when it comes to books. Um, and I think like, but if you are targeting to this younger audience of readers, but you're also getting to talk about things like fascism in those books, and you just that awareness of, oh, this story isn't about that thing, but it kind of also is about that thing. Like kids are smart. They get it. It's cool.
I'm glad you brought that up. I've been very lucky about that. I
Mhm.
had a mentor early on, Rob Valois, a great, great editor,
Mm,
hired me to do it to adapt one of the Boba Fett Clone Wars arcs
mm,
of all things. I'd never written for kids, and I was terrified. And Rob was like, okay, so don't use like a 50-cent word when you don't need to.
mm.
Keep your sentence structure straightforward and always make sure the reader knows who's talking. And I was like, why is that not just advice for any book? He was like, I agree. Go out there and have fun. And it was so, so helpful, and I'm so grateful. But yeah, I totally agree with you. Kids lead really complicated lives. Like
Yeah,
they're aware of the world around them, they're affected by the world around them. And you talk to any kid of basically any age where you're at, like talk to the kid age about like their social life, and it's hugely complex. Like
yeah,
Jane Austen would have a field day. Like, yeah, you don't need to shield kids from that. Just
yeah.
No. Who's talking? Straightforward sentence structure, no 50-cent words. You're good.
Oh,
There's so little difference between the writing and Servants of the Empire or say Last Jedi novelization or anything else. It's just really not that different. The books are a little shorter. That's it.
in this business, we call that a segue because you did write the novelization for The Last Jedi, which I love, by the way, because I love the little things along the way that it kind of adds to just make an already great story because it is a really, really good story. That's not up for debate in this context. It takes an already really good story and just makes it so much better because it is the expanded edition. I haven't gotten to talk to a ton of novelization authors in terms of Star Wars. Tell me about your experience working on that because it's a little bit different.
Yeah, I had a leg up from the beginning. Ryan Johnson, it turns out, there had been movies as a kid that he was not allowed to see. And so he had bought the novelizations. And that was his way to getting to experience the movie. So he saw real value in novelizations that I think a lot of writers, directors would not have. Um, which that was super interesting. And he was also just unbelievably generous. One of the first things he did, I mean, I'd met him half an hour before. He said, I'm going to give you every iteration of the script, um, leading up to the shooting script. And if there's anything in there, you think you can do something with, go for it. Which was unbelievably generous and kind, and something a lot of people would not have done. And that was a huge, huge help to me in writing that novelization. I mean, another thing, it's kind of a tragedy. I mean, they've never published the script of The Last Jedi, though I get why. But Ryan's scripts are different from other people's in that you have a very clear sense of where the characters are emotionally, what they're feeling, etc. In a way that's not true, I think, in a lot of other scripts I've read. So that was enormously helpful also as a novelization writer. I think I mean, this is the only novelization I've ever written, but I imagine when you take that gig, a lot of what you're doing is kind of going inside the characters' heads, etc. And Ryan had actually done a lot of that work already. That was already in there. Um, that said, I mean, there were some really interesting challenges there. Um, One of them was the Kylo scenes, the kind of Rashomon thing where you're seeing that fateful confrontation multiple times. That was a really interesting challenge. How do we do that on the page? And I eventually got to it by using the exact same structure, etc., and then picking the ways to depart from it. So you want to have that same effect of the reader of, through the sentence structure, etc. Oh, we're back here. I need to pay attention. And now let's see what's different. That was an interesting challenge. A really, really big one in the movie, after Ray's experience in the mirror cave, we go to, if I'm remembering correctly, kind of a voiceover, and she's telling her experience. And then the assumption is that she's telling Luke. And then the surprise in the movie is you cut to Kylo, and you're like, oh, something has changed. This is big. How to do that on the page was really interesting because that's entirely using the visual language of filmmaking. We know what a voiceover means, and the shock is when you see who the listener is. How could you do that on the page? That one took me, oh my God, that one took me days and days of walking around trying to figure out how to do it. Because essentially you're really kind of translating that to something totally new.
Yeah.
How do I do that just with words?
Yeah.
I remember I asked Ryan that when I met with him too, and he kind of looked thoughtful. He was like, I have no idea. I was like, damn it. I thought maybe you just solved that one for me, but no. So that was fun. Another thing that happened there was so I had I'd written all or most of the novelization. It's been a while, off the scripts, etc. And about, I want to say about a month before the movie came out, I was invited out to Burbank to see it in a screening room. Which, oh my God, really? Oh my God, I was so thrilled. So I went out there. I had no idea what this would be like. I thought it would be like fanfare, but it's not. They actually just stick you in a dark room and the movie starts. Um, a couple of Daisy Ridley's people were there, like these kind of like big statuesque English women in giant black boots who never talked to anybody. So that was a little odd. And we were all kind of sitting there, and the lights went down, and the movie started. But when the lights went down, they went down. There was not any light except for what you got from the screen. And I realized very quickly that what I had thought was the version of the script they had shot and that I had written off of was not, in fact, the version they had shot.
Oh no.
Sequencing, particularly in the first kind of quarter of the movie, was very different. And I kind of panicked in the dark because I was like, oh my God, what do I do? Um, and what I did was the sensible thing. I started taking notes frantically, except it was pitch black. I got out of the movie. Daisy Ridley's like booted people marched off somewhere, and I got out of the movie and I looked down at my notebook, and I had written all my notes like basically on the same line. It was
No.
just this useless like smudge of ink. And I was like, all right, that's gonna do me no good. So I had to go back home, and figure out like from what I remembered how to get this right. So that was an interesting challenge at the very last minute. Um, but oh God, it was so much fun. And thanks primarily to Ryan's generosity and kindness, which once again, like, I think, any sensible director writer would have been like, no, I'm not doing that. But he, was incredibly nice about all of it and generous in a way that made my life so much easier. And then, just looking at that movie and trying to make it work and trying to figure out, where can we deepen this story in ways that are interesting, in ways that are hopefully not just self-serving, in ways that, fit the idea that, if we could have done a 4-hour movie, what would we have done? What are the things in characters' heads that you really kind of can only get from a book? How does that work? And that was great fun to explore. So, and we just, went from there. A last thing there, and I'll finally shut up, is that was interestingly, that was the first time a Star Wars novelization had not come out a couple of weeks before the movie. That used to be the standard. That was the first time it was tied to the DVD, and I remember I was actually not happy about that because I knew it would cost me like on the Times bestseller list.
No.
But it actually turned out to be great because that was a movie that, people needed to sit with a little
Mhm.
and think about, myself included. And, actually having it come out with the DVD was perfect because that was just about the right amount of time for people who had loved it to want to go back to it and take a look, and for people who had kind of not loved it to, take another look too and maybe reassess it. And to the extent the novelization could play a role in that, I'm pretty happy about that.
This novelization is a really good example of how, like, so many screen to book adaptions have the potential to be different enough that they are so valuable. And I think, like, a lot of people might look at that and be like, oh, like, I've seen the movie. Do I need to read the book? But this book, because as you mentioned, it has to do some things a little bit differently because it's a book, not a movie. Being able to tell the same story in different mediums can be so effective in such an interesting way. And so I've always been a fan, personally.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I, I mean this is larger than a novelization. I feel like I mean this comes up in kind of lore Star Wars books too. I feel like the job there is, first of all, it's to kind of take your authorial ego, which I think is for any author is considerable, and kind of put it aside. Like
Mm.
your job is to support a story. I looked at the novelization as the only reason I'm writing it is because Ryan Johnson is super busy. Otherwise, he would do it and do a better job than me, but he's not available. He's like, mixing sound or whatever. Um, and, I think that's true with lore too. The idea should be, in my mind, that, you know, the root story there, the person reading this book wants to go back to it. Like they're like, oh, this is deeper. This is so much more fun. I want to go re-experience this story again with kind of my radar up for some of these things, whether they're, it's about the ships or, here's what Ray was doing right before that scene or whatever it is. And so that's really important to me. As I said before, like I don't like recontextualizing stuff, undermining it, certainly not, etc. Just, we're all Star Wars fans. I want you to re-engage with the story. And so, to the extent the novelization did that, I feel like it's a success and that makes me happy.
And it makes us happy reading it. Most recently, you got to be on the Timelines team, which is so fun. And you also, very recently, worked on the latest edition of Complete Locations. I had to look over here to make sure I had that right. What do you love about working on reference materials like this? Because you've done so many of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think the mission is what I just said, and hopefully, if you're looking at this like gorgeous cutaway of Mustafar or Ferrex, hopefully it makes you want to go back, um, to Rogue One or to Andor or to whatever it is, and or Book of Boba Fett, you name it, and like re-engage with that stuff. I mean, to me, that's the job of the book. What I found interesting is. Um, I'm thinking about the DK books, but I think this is true of everyone. Like when you get those books, they come in like this weird publisher Latin, which is not quite Latin. It's just sort of random words in chunks I'm doing the hand thing again that no one can see. They're kind of these chunks of paragraphs and little annotations in kind of mock Latin that you need to fill in. But what I've learned doing a lot of them that's really interesting is like, those chunks are not random. You have to think about a spread, whether it's about a rebel attack cruiser or um, you know, a city on Tatooine, whatever it is. You've got to think about it as a whole and realize that it tells a story also in a way that you maybe weren't thinking of just looking at all that Latin and looking at the picture that you had to make sense of. That was an interesting thing to learn. So now if I look at it, I have, say, six chunks of text. What am I doing with each of those? There's a main kind of introductory one. The message of that one is pretty clear. You're kind of setting the scene for the reader, reminding them of where we are, what happens here, etc. But the others um, get more interesting. Like, what are their roles? Like, and it becomes this mix of, I'm going deeper and explaining something about this ship, this place. What is its history? There's usually one where I'm like, what is its role in the story? How can I deepen that? And then, going for things like larger context, like if it's a ship like I remember the ships in Last Jedi that get blown up kind of one by one as the fleet gets pursued. Like, what's that ship's role in the task force? Things like that. But you know, thinking about telling a story that way, and then also thinking about how the reader is going to navigate that on the page. What order is he or she going to read that in, and how should that work? Um, and that was a puzzle I had kind of never known existed until I started doing those books. And that's something that's actually really satisfying. You're essentially designing your reader experience where you might have thought you're just kind of, I've got, you know, 340 words of facts. How do I disperse those? But creating a satisfying reader experience out of that is really fun to do, and something I feel like, I hope at least, that I've gotten better at over time. So it was, for complete locations, it was really fun coming back to those skills and seeing if I still had them and going from there.
That is so cool because obviously, um, being on the outside, I never would have known it was like that. But to like kind of to have you describe it as like you're kind of like designing the experience. Um, I have so many reference books that like I've flipped through, but have not really had the time to dive very deep into like page by page. And this conversation is making me want to change that because
Well, I
there.
think you put your finger on something that's really key to this. Like, if you think about a spread in a reference book like that, I mean, it's a tremendous amount of information,
Mm,
right? It at literally at a glance, you're holding it in front of yourself. I'm doing the hand thing again. Sorry. You're holding it in front of yourself and you're looking at it. And like with that much information on a two-page spread like that, like it's very easy to have that kind of push the reader away. This is too much. Like, oh my God, I don't know where to start. What do I do? Like the idea of that should be to draw you in.
mm,
And I primarily worked with DK, and they're, I think, geniuses at visually
mm,
organizing information so that you want to engage with it
yeah.
instead of kind of fleeing from it. So, the DK has the secret sauce that
Yes.
they deserve an enormous amount of credit for. But also, I see that as my job. Like, how do I do that exactly? Like, if you're going to read this paragraph, like, I want you to then want to read the whole page.
Mm,
I don't want you to land on that paragraph and be like, oh, some facts. Oh my God, is this book full of facts? Like, oh, this is too much, and like back away. So yeah, I mean that's been super fun learning how to do. But I just think it's from the same perspective you articulate. Like, just kind of always think about the reader. Like if I'm
yeah.
the reader of this book, what do I want? Like what would make me happy
Mm,
versus like what would push me away? And kind of never, ever, ever lose sight of that perspective.
mm. One more question, and then you can go enjoy your pizza and Andor. I promise. Um, when you hear the words Star Wars, what's the first image that immediately comes to mind?
Image. No, it's funny. It's I hear the John Williams score,
Oh,
um, which is another lesson I've taken to heart. I think this one was actually mine. I don't think anyone taught me this one, though I'm probably not giving someone credit they deserve. But that when I had an interesting journey. I wrote lots and lots of lore for years, and then but I had done tons and tons of fiction writing in my life, and I eventually got to the point where I realized that, fiction writing in Star Wars was an itch I really, really wanted to scratch. You can see that in Essential Guide to Warfare, which is full of vignettes that are basically little kind of mini short stories. And though I didn't know it at the time, like that was me kind of trying to break out of what I at the time saw as like a lore box
mm,
and do other stuff. And my poor editor, Eric Chernovice, had to kind of dial me back. He was like, "What are we doing here? Come on, wait, this is not the place for vignette number 30. You're describing like Republic cruisers," which he was right about, poor Eric. But that's been an interesting journey for me and going back and forth. But one thing I learned really early on, whether it was lore or whether it was fiction, was like, if I got lost in something, I'd be like, what's the John Williams score doing here? What's the music? And if I didn't have an answer for that, if I didn't know, that was a sign that I'd like kind of wandered off the path too much and had to come back. Whether it's like, oh, here's the Republic attack cruiser. Here's the kind of amazing march that John Williams would put underneath this as it came like, up to a separatist planet. Or, in fiction, I think you see it quite clearly, like, here's our main character again. What is their theme? Like where are we drawing the viewer, the reader, what have you back to? And I found that really useful. Like, can I hear the music? Um, and then for me, that was shorthand for all the other things that are so fun about Star Wars, whether they're amazing visuals or like the snap hiss of a lightsaber or, anything that gives you that kind of amazing Flash Gordon vibe that also comes with this really, really deep, rich universe. So yeah, for Star Wars, for me, yeah, it's that John Williams score. If I can't hear it, something's wrong. I need to like step back and see where I am.
I've gotten so many different answers to that question, obviously, because everyone I talk to who I ask comes into Star Wars and this conversation with their own perspective experiences. And so every answer is different. But really, what it all comes back to is, the first thing that anyone thinks of when they hear the word Star Wars is whatever Star Wars means to them and whatever kind
Yeah.
of grounds them in this huge, expansive, always getting bigger universe that all of us love so much. And I like asking this question because it's fun.
Okay. What's your answer?
Oh, um, I don't think anyone's ever thrown it back on me before. But for some reason,
Well, now's time. I want to know.
I don't know why this is. Maybe we'll find out when I talk about it. But the first thing I think of is the attack run on the Death Star from A New
Yeah.
Hope. Like all the X-Wings like coming in and the whole attack is starting. And I don't know why that is because I consider myself a prequel kid because they came out like when I was, theoretically like the perfect age for them. Um,
Right.
but I had seen Star Wars before that. I'd watched the original trilogy in some capacity before that because my dad has been a Star Wars fan since Star Wars came out. He saw Star Wars, the movie, I think he
Yeah.
said 11 times when it came out.
Yeah.
Kind of back to what you were talking about, how like some people just like kept going and going and going because it was that experience that it was so unique that no one had that never happened before. Um, and so like I must have, even if I don't remember it, I must have consumed that very iconic scene enough times growing up that like now that is just like what I immediately think of. Um, because it is like that moment where like if you consider A New Hope the beginning of Star Wars, like it depends
Yeah.
where you want to come into what you're looking at first. But that is really like the moment that everything changed for these characters because it was like, oh, like we actually can take an actual stand against oppression.
Yeah.
And everything was kind of leading up to that. That must be why. But that's always immediately what I think of. I don't know. It's not lightsabers. It's not someone recently was like, oh, I think of the logo verse. And I was like, I mean, that is also iconic.
Yeah.
Um, because it's everywhere. I think it's on this shirt. Um, but yeah, that's what I think of first.
I
And
love it.
everything.
It's kind of Star Wars osmosis,
Yeah,
but hugely powerful and probably the wellspring of a whole lot else.
yeah. And now I wanna watch that movie again. It's fine.
See, this is what we go for.
I
Yes, we
know.
want to re-engage.
I know,
Perfect.
exactly.
Mission accomplished.
Exactly.
We're fist bumping, kind of.
Yes.
They can't hear that either, but we are.
It happened. It happened digitally, I promise. I actually am my somewhere in my city, they're playing A New Hope, like in a theater somewhere
Really?
on Saturday, yeah. And so we're going to see it. And I haven't decided. I'm like, I need to like actually dress up somehow. I'll figure it out. But no, I'm really excited because
Oh my God, I would be so thrilled about that. I mean, I saw them in theater for the special editions, which was
mhm.
98, which gosh, is suddenly an eternity ago. Oh my God, that's so much fun. I'm so
Yeah,
jealous.
yeah, I've never seen A New Hope on a big screen before.
Oh wow.
So it's gonna be fun.
Yes.
Yeah. It's my anniversary weekend too. We got married on May the 4th. Because of course we did. So
Yeah.
it's gonna be fun. But
Oh my God, definitely fun. I'm so great. You're gonna write about this, I hope. I'm
you know
all over it.
what? I honestly had not even considered that, but now I have to.
Yes, come on.
Oh, why didn't I think of that? That's a really good idea. Hold on. Hold on. I gotta write this. I gotta write it down or I'll forget. That's where we're at. It's so good. And I have it on record that you gave me this idea. No, this is exactly what we want whenever we're talking about Star Wars in any capacity is like the joy. Like, it doesn't matter who I am talking to about Star Wars. The joy that they ultimately have for whatever segment of this franchise just like comes through at some point. Um, and for the record, this entire conversation has been you just like nerding out about Star Wars the entire time. Which is great and exactly what I want and exactly what I would expect from someone who's worked on as much Star Wars as you have. I am genuinely so happy that we got to do this. I sent you a message on Blue Sky of all places to be like, "Hey, do you want to do this?" And you're like, "As long as we can like do it through email and not social media," which is it's so hard. It's so hard because Twitter went away and now I'm like, I don't know how to reach anyone anymore.
I
Um,
know. I
oh,
just got on Instagram, which I hate.
oh no.
I got on it to find tattoo artists, which but then I like followed the people I knew and now they like want content. I'm like, oh my God, what the fuck did I do? Um, but yeah, yeah, no, God, social media was a nightmare from the beginning. But we squeeze some good out of it.
We
That's the way
do.
I look at it.
We do. Like, look at us. We're
Yeah,
here. We did the thing.
exactly.
I kept you for so much longer than I said I would, but listen,
Oh, yeah.
it was great. It was great because my favorite thing about talking to authors who have done a million things is being able to go through their entire
Yeah.
timeline to be like, tell me about this thing you did, and then tell me about this completely not even close to the same other thing that you did. And it's great. I love talking to new authors too, don't get me wrong, because they're so terrified, and I just have to be like, hey, listen, it's gonna be
Yeah.
okay. But oh, this is so fun.
I've
Yes.
occasionally been recruited to be the new author whisperer.
Oh,
I'm like, it's gonna be great. You just there's three fans in 1,000. You're gonna want to block, but the rest are lovely people.
that's
And even when they're too enthusiastic, it's from a place of love. But yeah, no, it's so much fun. Yeah, no, I pinch myself every time that I get to do this and get to do it with like-minded fun people. And yeah, we're all incredibly lucky.
Now This Is Lit is part of the Faraway Fandom Network. It is produced by Devor Montum and written, hosted, and edited by me. Jose Jimenez designed our podcast art. You can keep up with the show on Substack and Now This Is Lit, and find the show wherever you get your podcasts. There are so many ways you can support the show, and all of those ways are linked in the show description. The newest way is to become a member of our Patreon. For $1 a month, you can get access to an exclusive show and a sticker. And if we get 500 people to support the Patreon per month, I can hire an editor. That would be great for me, and maybe for you too. So if you'd like to support the show with just $1 a month, you can do it that way. Or you can just keep listening and sharing the episodes. That is also helpful, and I appreciate it. For more book reviews and Star Wars Book Celebration, follow Star Wars Book Reviews on Instagram and TikTok.